Archbishop Julian, congratulations on reaching this wonderful milestone of 50 years of priesthood.
Thank you.
50 years is a very long time, it's half a century. You would have witnessed a lot of change in the church and in society during that time. I'm just wondering if over 50 years you ever had any doubt that you chose the right path in the priesthood?
No, I've always felt that this is God's call on my life, and so I haven't felt it was something that I chose, it was a career that I was interested in or anything like that. It's always been at the foundation of my understanding of being a priest is that this is what God has asked me to do with my life.
Mm-hmm. Now, you first felt the call to priesthood at a very early age. I think you're in grade 5 or 6 at school. Tell me what happened there.
Yes, it was in the latter years of my primary school, and we had the practice and we were encouraged to make a visit to the chapel in the school when we first arrived at school. So I did that. I distinctly remember one morning going into the chapel and kneeling down at the altar, just to say a brief prayer, and the words came in my head very, very simply, very clearly: "One day you will be a priest," and those words just stayed with me, and I see that now as my moment of calling. And then right through high school, the idea of becoming a priest was something which remained with me, and so I then carried that thought of entering the priesthood upon completing high school as really my vocation in life.
Mm-hmm. And when you heard those words in your mind, was there ever any doubt that that was coming from God?
Well, look, at the time I didn't make that connection. I think that all came later when I was able to understand things more clearly. But it was very clear in my mind, this thought, these words, and I accepted them and had no resistance to them. And when vocation directors came to the school, I would speak with them and so forth. So it was something that was just in me to do, and I just never really doubted. Now, subsequently, I can look back and say, I can understand this was the moment when God did actually call me. Mm-hmm. But at that stage, at that age, it was something which was just a thought in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Now, you entered the seminary in 1969 and you went straight into seminary from school. So that kind of indicates there was no real doubts there. Was there any desire to experience life before that, or not really at all?
I think because the thought was very clear, this was what I was going to do. So when I completed, I didn't tell a lot of people about it. I told my parents, and I didn't say a lot to my schoolmates about it. But it was just in my mind that this is what I was going to do. So when high school finished, I then made application to join the seminary as a seminarian for the Archdiocese of Sydney.
Mm-hmm. And as a seminarian at St Patrick's College in Manly, you had another profound spiritual experience after attending a prayer meeting. Tell me about that.
Yes, this was in my 4th year of studies. I did my first 3 years up at Springwood in the Blue Mountains, and then we moved to Manly. And at that stage, the charismatic renewal was just beginning in Sydney, and there was a prayer meeting that used to be held at St Michael's, the University College at Sydney University. And there's a group of university students coming in, and some of the seminarians were going over to those prayer meetings, and they invited me to come over, so I went over there and attended a number of the prayer meetings. Very different from what I've been used to. I'd grown up in a very traditional Catholic background, and the idea of putting your arms in the air and singing very happy, sort of joyful songs was something which was foreign, but also attractive and quite inspiring in a way, because these young people were obviously full of their faith and their love of God and wanting to give praise and worship to God. I don't know how many meetings I attended, probably a couple, and then after one of the meetings, a couple of students came up to me and said, "Would you like to be prayed over?" And I said, "Yes, that's fine." So we went into the little back room, and they sat me down in the chair, and then they asked me, "Do you accept Jesus as your Lord and Saviour?" And I remember thinking, "Of course I do, I'm a seminarian." So I said yes, and then not fully really grasping the meaning, what they were saying to me. But then they just prayed over me. Now, nothing particularly happened that night, but I was grateful for the prayer. Probably a week or so later, I'm not sure exactly how long it was, but one evening at the end of my, I was working in my room doing some studies, and I just came out in the grounds of the college to get some fresh air before going into Vespers in the college chapel. I remember I was walking alone in the grounds and doing nothing more than just enjoying a bit of peace and quiet. And I can only describe it as a moment where I sensed God's presence in a very, very real and immediate way. I don't think it lasted very long, but it was very, very profound. It really had the effect of me firstly sensing God's personal love for me. I'd always thought God's running a universe. I'm just one among so many. But here I felt the direct love of God for me. It was quite a profound experience. But it's what happened afterwards that I think was a surprise to me, because immediately I just felt this enormous joy. And then I just found myself breaking out in praise of God. And particularly I found myself moving into what they call the gift of tongues, and I just was praising God. So it was a very profound personal experience of God's presence, of God's love. And I really look back now and see that as a great revolution in my faith. I'd always believed in God, of course, but now I felt God's immediate relationship with me. And it also changed all sorts of ways, because I very distinctly remember afterwards, when I was reading Scripture now, before we'd study Scripture, we'd be analysing it, or we'd be seeking to understand its meaning and purpose and so on. But now when I was reading Scripture, I really felt it come alive. I really felt God speaking to me personally. So Scripture changed from being something that I read and studied to something which was the living Word of God speaking very much, not just to my mind, but speaking to my heart. Yeah. I remember my own prayer too changed from, if you like, saying prayers to really praying. And I used to spend long times now in personal prayer, in the chapel and in my room and so on. So that's why I say it's a real revolution in my faith. So all the elements of my faith were there, but they just were moved to a new level. I'm very, very grateful for this experience. Very, very grateful, because I think it was really foundational then to the way I'd lived my faith. And a lot of things I think flowed on subsequently as a result of that experience. I remember at the same time too, we were doing a course on grace, and that was very significant for me, because we were looking at the Cappadocian fathers, fathers from what's modern Turkey, and who were speaking about the Holy Spirit. And when I was reading their writings, I was thinking, I know what they're talking about. The Holy Spirit is a real presence in our life. And so the whole idea of the grace of God, the action, the movement of God, the communication of God directly to ourselves came to me in a very real way. And so, as I said, I think that was the moment, what I call a moment of grace. That was the moment that God in his mercy towards me touched my life with his grace through the presence and activity of the Holy Spirit.
Now, you were ordained to the priesthood on the 7th of September 1974 at St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney. What do you remember of that day?
Well, I don't have much more memory of it than actually being there, being ordained. I think I was probably a little bit overwhelmed by the occasion. It was something that obviously I've been working towards for many years, the years in the seminary, and thinking about it over my high school years. I think it was, particularly now as I look back, it was a moment of what we describe as an ontological change. And I appreciate that, again, in hindsight, more than I probably did at the time. For me, I was just probably a bit overwhelmed by the big event and all of us in the cathedral and the significance of being ordained as a priest. But as I look back now, what I'm deeply conscious of, that it changed my being. I am now a priest, and I'm conscious of that identity that is now absolutely integral to who I am. Mm-hmm. So it's not just something added on, it's not just a job that I'm taking on, it's not just something that now shapes what I do, it is who I am. Mm-hmm. So everything about my life now is priestly, if you like. So I'm conscious of that the significance of actually being ordained a priest. It's not just, again, a job or a role. It is actually who you are.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember the actual moment of ordination? Do you remember feeling anything significant at that
point? No, I don't. I just, in fact, I have very vague memories of the day. So I think again it was just probably being overwhelmed by the moment.
Yes, and following that, celebrating your first Mass. What was that like? What do you remember of that?
Yeah, well, that was celebrating in my home parish of Eastwood, St Kevin's in Eastwood. It's a church, firstly, that I'd had a long association with. The priest there, Father Hazler in particular, was a man I deeply admired. It was my family church, so it was that was very much a more personal moment, and I had family and friends there. I had a group of young people who'd actually even composed music for the first Mass, and so the Mass did go a bit long, I must confess, but it really was a wonderful and joyful event to be in my home parish with family and friends and celebrating my first Mass.
Mm-hmm. Now, over 50 years, you would have celebrated a lot of Masses. Has your understanding of the nature of the Mass and the Eucharist changed and evolved and grown over the years in any way?
Look, I think, as with everything, there's been a maturing, a deepening of appreciation. I say now, and I say to myself often, the most important thing I'm going to do today is say Mass. So I often would say morning Mass down here at the cathedral, as I did this morning, and it's the foundation of my day, but it's also being a priest. The words of the Mass too, just the idea that this is a moment not only of invoking the Holy Spirit to transform the bread and wine, the body and blood of Christ, but it's a moment which the Church is drawing down, if you like, the sanctifying work of Christ upon the world. Mm-hmm. So I'm very conscious every Mass, if you like, has a cosmic dimension to it, or has a spiritual dimension to it far beyond just the concrete reality of that moment, of that particular Mass. So again, I think the years have led to a deeper appreciation of the importance of the Mass, and I would probably associate my celebration of Mass quite specifically with the significance of the death and resurrection of Christ. Mm-hmm. So what we say after the consecration, proclaiming our faith, we proclaim Christ's saving work on Calvary, and I see every Mass as being an engagement with that and drawing down the saving work of Christ into the world of today, obviously into the lives of those people who are at the Mass, but I see it as having a profound spiritual significance. Every single Mass is that, and so that's what animates particularly my personal celebration of Mass each day.
Mm-hmm. Now, you went on to serve in several different parishes in the Sydney area. What valuable lessons did you learn through ordinary parish life?
Yes, I think initially it was there was an excitement about being involved in parish life. My first parish, Kingsgrove, I was there actually for 7 years, so it turned out to be quite a while. That was a a great parish because it was a fairly big parish. It was lively. We had schools associated, two, a boys' school and a girls' school associated with it. I had two high schools. I remember spending many days in each week giving catechesis, scripture lessons in the high schools. So my initial years were very active in a very active parish. Yeah. So it was a very good experience and really a wonderful parish. My interests were particularly with young people as a young priest, and almost from the beginning I began to form a group. We formed a group of university students, used to meet and have reflections on faith, and they became then active with me in the parish in a variety of ways. So those first years were years of discovery of parish life and really immersing myself in it and really enjoying it. I did plenty of weddings too. Young priest, plenty of weddings. We had a fairly modern church, and it was we had a very big girls' school, and all the girls wanted to get married in the church. So I was spending every week I'd be meeting couples, preparing them for weddings. So it was really a wonderful exposure to parish life, and very much something that I found engaging and found very fruitful.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you say, you had a strong focus on young people, and I know that you organise lots of missions and rallies for young Catholics where you focused very much on forming them in the faith and equipping them to go out and evangelise. Why did you focus so strongly on that?
Look, I think that was very significant. When I, as I said, when I began, I had a group of young university students, and we were meeting regularly and so on. But one thing that happened to me as a young priest that was very important was I was reading the encyclical letter of Pope, or the Apostolic Exhortation of Pope Paul VI, called Evangelii Nunciandi. And there was a phrase in that really struck me, where he said, the church exists in order to evangelise. That was a very significant moment for me, a discovery. I remember just thinking, yes, that's really what we're about. That's really what the church is meant to be about. And I had we had another change of parish priest, and the second parish priest was very good in the whole area of renewal in the church and so on. And I remember talking to him about this and my conviction that I really should be focusing more on evangelisation of young people. And so he very much encouraged me. And what I decided to do was to have a mission just for young people. He actually recommended a young evangelist a Catholic evangelist from Brisbane called Shane Bennett. He knew him. He said he could be good to give the mission. So we had this mission in the parish hall over a week, and we got quite a few young people coming along to it, mainly post-school young people. But out of that, they too had a moment of grace, and so a core of young people developed in the parish who were really alive in their faith, and from there it evolved quite extraordinarily, and I felt that somehow I was being as much guided by the Holy Spirit as having any kind of pastoral strategy or pastoral plan. We used to meet on Sunday afternoons. We'd have a prayer meeting, and then we used to animate the Mass with the music and the readers and so on. And then we'd have a time we call it fellowship time after Mass in the parish hall. And the group grew and grew and grew to probably reaching about 80 in number. And we also started forming small sharing groups. Young people would come together in groups during the week and have sharing their Christian life, praying together, praying for each other and so So all that was quite an extraordinary experience for me. And again, I keep using the word grace because I felt somehow there was a grace at work in all of this that was well beyond my own skills and talents and understandings. But I witnessed just extraordinary things happening in the lives of young people, and it really confirmed this idea that that this needs to be the focus for the church's ministry, and this needs to be a particular focus for my own ministry. So when I was moved to my second parish, which was Manly Parish, I remember I was visiting a family, and they were just talking one night, and the father said he had a couple of young daughters, and he said, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do about youth? In the parish?" I'd only been there for a relatively short time, and of course I thought immediately of what I did in Kingsgrove, and I thought, well, I'll put on a parish mission. And then he said to me, he said, if you put it on the parish hall, you'll attract all the kind of the Catholic kids, the good kids, they'll come along. And I thought he's right. So I said, right, we'll put it out in the open. So I put it on an oval, Manly Oval, and we held it. And then there was a fellow who was an advertising man, and I was talking to him about it, and he said, you should call it Jesus Christ at Manly Oval. So really in your face kind of statement about who we were, what we were about. So we got musicians. I invited Shane Bender to come down again. I spoke at the rally, and thousands turned up. And many people there again had very significant spiritual experiences. So that was a whole area of my priestly ministry that certainly I'd never envisaged I would be involved with, but it became something that was really at the heart of what I was doing as a priest.
Now, another moment of grace perhaps was when you encountered Ralph Martin, who came to Australia to speak. He's an evangelist from the United States. And I believe he said something during his talk that affected you quite deeply. Can you tell me about that?
Ralph Martin had just written a book called Christ is the Truth, which is really about his concern about the church losing its way with regard to clear proclamation of the truth of the gospel and the truth of teaching, particularly on a number of moral issues at the time. I went up to the conference up in Brisbane, but during one of his talks, he just said, the words I remember were "build the ark." They're the words that stuck in my mind, and it was a moment where I just felt that what I needed to be doing now was building the ark, was building communities, lay communities. I had a bit of connection before this with the Disciples of Jesus community, which was a community just beginning in Sydney, and I felt a conviction I should be part of that community and contribute to that community. So for the next 11 years or so, maybe even longer, but maybe 15 years, I was involved with Disciples of Jesus community, work with them, and saw the value of forming communities, if you like, intentional Christian communities. They were called covenant communities in those days. And that was, again, for me, very influential in terms that helped me to see a number of things. It helped me to understand more fully how to live, if you like, full Christian discipleship. How to take a lot of the teaching that's found in the New Testament and make it very practical in its application for life in the world. So there was a lot of teaching and formation of the people in the community. Also, the whole idea of community, of brotherhood, which was an important element to the community life. All those things were very formative for me about the idea of Christian discipleship.
Now tell me about the influence of Pope John Paul II on your priesthood, because he would have been Pope for the vast majority of your priesthood.
He was. In fact, when he died, Cardinal Pell was overseas, and I was a senior bishop in Sydney, auxiliary bishop in Sydney. And so I celebrated the Mass just upon his death in St Mary's Cathedral. And I remember the thought really came to me then, this Pope has been the Pope of my priesthood. And really, I was ordained in 1974, he became Pope in 1978. And so all over the years, I constantly found myself looking to him, following things he was saying and doing, reading his writings. I was so influenced by, really have to say, by his charismatic character and his great sense of the faith and of what Catholicism has to offer, not only for people's lives but also for the world today. His whole vision of the faith really was very inspirational for me, and I remember often he was just an example for me, and I'd be thinking about what I might be doing, and I'm almost thinking, now what would Pope John Paul do in this instance, you know? So he really became a mentor in a way for me over the years as a priest. So he was a very, very influential figure for me personally, and I'm deeply grateful for the way that he formed me in my priestly vision and in my understanding of the role of the Church in the world today.
Did you ever get a chance to meet him?
I did subsequently when I became a bishop. I met him on a couple of occasions, which was a really wonderful moment. In fact, this pectoral cross that I wear he gave it to me when I first met him, just after becoming an auxiliary bishop. So I like to wear it every day. It gives me a very real link with him, and a sense that he, I think, well, I describe him as the Pope of my priesthood.
And also under his pontificate, the Catechism of the Catholic Church came out in 1994. And I believe that you got in your car and you drove from Sydney to Canberra just to get a copy because it was being launched in Canberra.
I did.
Yeah, tell me about that. Why was it so significant?
Yeah, well, look, at the time I'd been involved a lot, not only with the evangelisation of young people, but I realised young people needed formation in faith. In fact, one of the things I developed was a pastoral training school to provide young people over a 2-week period with some sound formation in the faith. And I was very aware of the lack of solid catechesis. And a lot of young people just didn't know the foundations of the faith. And sometimes it's very hard to find it because there's a lot of theological writing, there are a lot of different views on things, and it was hard to find anything authoritative, you know. And so when the catechism was produced, I was really very excited about it because I felt this is what we really need. We need a solid, clear exposition of the Catholic faith. And so it was being launched by Cardinal Clancy down in Canberra. So I wanted this to be there. So I hopped in the car, drove down there, attended the launch, went up to the bookstall and bought a copy of the Catholic Catechism, and brought it home and sat down and read it. And it was just music to my soul, because it was not only just doctrinal, but it was deeply grounded in Scripture, deeply grounded in the teaching of the saints over the centuries. So it was profoundly Catholic, and the clarity on particular issues was there that I had felt lacking, you know. And I struggled at times to find, you know, authoritative sources on particular issues, and so here I could get it all in the Catechism. So I think it was really one of the great gifts to the Church from the pontificate of John Paul II, and so important for the Church at that time, and continues for me to be such a help and a guide in, now as my role as a bishop, in preaching and teaching, to draw on the authentic tradition of the church.
Now, in 1998, when you were getting close to 25 years of priesthood, you decided to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Why did you decide to do that, and what was that experience like, and what was the impact on your ministry?
I'd gone, in the years prior to that, this is 1998, and I was coming up to being 50 years old and 25 years a priest. And at that stage, through circumstance, I was now a parish priest. I'd been in Annandale and later in Dulwich Hill, and I was, a lot of the avenues for youth ministry just had dried up. They just weren't there anymore. There weren't the opportunities. And you know, I was thinking, well, maybe that whole period of my life now has ended, and now, if you like, for the next period of my life, what can I expect? Where should I look to direct my efforts and so forth? And I was not very clear. I wasn't clear on what was to happen with my life, where I was to go. I was very happy being a parish priest, and I was enjoying just the usual run of parish activities. But anyhow, I took myself off to do the Camino to Santiago. So I walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is in France, went over the Pyrenees, and then walked through to Santiago. Took me 30 days walking, and I just carried a simple prayer in my heart. It was really saying, Lord, what's next? Where do you want me to go? Nothing's really clear at this stage. If you want me to be a parish priest the rest of my life, that's fine. I'm very happy with that, no problem. So I just did the Camino carrying that kind of question in my mind. And I walked, and I just carried it with me during the course of the Camino. When I got to Santiago de Compostela, you were able to go in and pray before the tomb of St. James, just behind the altar. So when I got there, and I just, if I presented my petition to St. James, and when I walked away, I just felt all is going to be well. All is going to be fine. So I didn't get any revelation about what's next. I didn't get any sense of clear direction for my life from there. But I just this sense that all will be well. It's all okay. And I came away with the sense, okay, I'm going to be a parish priest. That's fine. And I was happy with that. It turned out to be quite different. And I always felt God had a smile on his face when he was just saying, don't worry, all will be well.
And obviously Cardinal George Pell had other plans for you as well, not to leave you as just a parish priest. So you became rector of the Seminary in Sydney in 2002 at his request. And I believe numbers of seminarians were quite low at that point in time.
That's correct.
Tell me, what did you set about doing to try and improve the situation there?
Yes, firstly, that was a big surprise to be asked to be rector of the seminary. As I said, my expectation was I was going to be a parish priest, and I was very happy to do that. But then the Cardinal asked me to be rector of the seminary. I didn't really want to be rector of the seminary. And I was saying to the Cardinal, look, if you don't feel I'm up to the job, I'm quite happy to be sent back to my parish. But I took it on. The Cardinal had clear expectations of wanting to reform, revitalise the seminary. He wanted me to introduce what they call a propaedeutic year, an initial formational year, almost like a novitiate year prior to them starting their studies. He certainly wanted to see a stronger structure to seminary life. All these things were things that I myself felt were important, so I was very happy to cooperate with his desire and intention for the seminary. The seminary numbers were low when I came in, and so I said about that I was very conscious of the need to ground the seminarians in the spiritual life and in a solid, sound spiritual life. was very keen for them to receive a formation in Christian character, discipleship, if you like. And I was also very keen to ensure that they received a sound theological formation, which was in the charge of the Catholic Institute of Sydney. So, and the other thing I said to the Cardinal, look, I really think we're forming pastors. I said, but we also need these days to have priests who have a missionary spirit. And so I began the practice of taking the seminarians, and we used to run missions during the holidays. I'd take them off, we'd run missions in parishes around Sydney, because I wanted them to develop a missionary orientation as well.
So, Your Grace, you were appointed an auxiliary bishop for Sydney in 2003. What was your immediate reaction when you found out you'd been appointed a bishop?
Well, it came out of the blue, and it came a complete surprise. I was a rector of the seminary in Sydney at that stage, and the secretary told me that there was a phone call for me one morning, and they said it was somebody with a strange accent. And so I went and picked up the phone. It was the Apostolic Ministry, who was Italian and had a heavy accent. And he informed me that Pope John Paul II had appointed me as an auxiliary bishop in Sydney. Now, that was a surprise, firstly, that I would be chosen to be a bishop. But secondly, I was thinking, but I was about 18 months as rector of the seminary, and I thought, but I've just become rector of the seminary, I've just hardly begun my term. I remember going to Cardinal Pell and saying to him that, appointed auxiliary bishop, and saying to him, look, but I've just been made rector, and the Cardinal just simply said, oh, you're doing them both, you're going to continue to be rector, but you're being an auxiliary bishop. Look, it was I remember going to the chapel afterwards and just kneeling down and saying, Lord, what have you done? It was a great surprise for me. It was overwhelming, really was overwhelming, and I felt inadequate. I felt this was asking something beyond my capacity. But I felt, I talked to Cardinal Pell about it, and he said, look, the Pope's chosen you, so give your answer. So I then said I would accept the role of being auxiliary bishop in Sydney.
Had it ever crossed your mind at all that you might be appointed a bishop?
I suppose that around those years the thought had crossed my mind, but I didn't really expect it, and certainly when I became rector of the seminary, I thought, well, that's not going to happen, because I've got another job in the church. So I mean, the thing that really I think was, for me personally, quite overwhelming was the idea that I was a successor to the apostles. That was just something that really stayed with me, just the extraordinary privilege and responsibility, because the Lord chose 12 apostles and they would be the foundations to the church, and now I was asked to be stepping into the Apostolic Ministry as a bishop. So it was very quite extraordinary, and as I said, quite overwhelming.
Did it ever occur to you to say no?
Look, it did cross my mind to say no. Not so much. Well, more because I thought, I'm not worthy of such a role in the church. But I think the Cardinal's words were encouraging to me in the sense that he felt I was capable, and he said the Pope also decided I'm capable. So it was really on that basis that I said yes.
Mm-hmm. And so you were ordained a bishop on the 3rd of September 2003. Did your life change forever from that point? And if so, how did it change?
Well, it did change. I mean, my sense of vocation was always to be a priest, and I always had seen myself as a priest. And I remember imagining my latter years as a priest. Maybe I'd been a nice parish. I was thinking of those days, parish up the Blue Mountains or somewhere like that, just a nice parish that I could retire, sort of move into a more retirement phase. So I had those visions of seeing my life out as a priest. So this was a big transformation, and a lot of things like being involved now in the Bishops' Conference. I remember going to the Bishops' Conference and being quite, again, overwhelmed by this whole new arena of activity and engagement in the life and mission of the church, because I'd only ever thought of myself working within the confines of a parish, really. And now suddenly there's this kind of universal sense, not only of the diocese, not only of Australia, but really as a bishop you have a sense of the universality of the church and your role in contributing to the church universal.
And why did you choose grace and truth as your episcopal motto?
Look, I don't know how it came to me, but certainly it was something that immediately was to me to be my motto, Gratia et Veritas, grace and truth. It's based in St John's Gospel, John chapter 1, verse 17, where St John says, Christ came full of grace and truth. Now, the two words were significant for me personally in terms of my own journey over the years. The whole idea of grace for me was, as I did speak about earlier on, about my moment of grace, that sense of God's immediate presence and action, God's love in my life. So I was very conscious that the Christian life it's a life of grace, and that I saw my mission as one of helping others come under the grace of God, come under ultimately the grace of salvation. So I saw that as my mission. But also in the years that had followed, I became more conscious of the challenges of truth in our times. And so I was aware that Christ came to present the truth. He said, I am the truth. And I realised that part of my mission as a bishop too, is to have a teaching mission and to present the fullness of the truth of the Catholic faith. So those two words encapsulated my vision for now my mission as a bishop. So grace and truth. And they remain sort of foundational to the way I understand my identity as a bishop, even till today.
And as auxiliary bishop in Sydney, you worked for about 10 years under Cardinal George Pell. What was he like as a person and as a leader?
I consider that a great privilege to have spent 10 years because I was actually the senior bishop fairly soon, because two of the other older auxiliary bishops had retired. So I became the senior auxiliary because we had now Archbishop Anthony Fisher as also an auxiliary. So I was working fairly closely with him, and I think firstly I was in awe of him because he was such a formidable figure, and I learnt enormous amounts from him about how to be a leader, how to be a bishop, how the challenges of the church in our time, of the things to do to meet those challenges. I watched some of the extraordinary things that he did during the time I was associated closely with him. Everything from establishing university campus, Notre Dame campus, through to the World Youth Day, and many other things that he was doing. I really learned how to be a bishop from Cardinal Pell, and I consider it really a great privilege to have been so closely associated with him during those years. And he was very good. He was both very clear in his direction and purpose for the Archdiocese of Sydney, and I could see that, and his sense that Archbishop Anthony and myself would be collaborators with him in this work. He had confidence in us, and I felt that confidence. He was not imposing himself on us, but we also clearly understood his expectations for us. So, but he gave us latitude to do things. He certainly gave me freedom to do a number of things. I'd come to him with different proposals at different times, and he would be very open to giving me approval to explore those various initiatives that I wanted to take in Sydney.
Now, during your time in Sydney, you also initiated the Walk with Christ procession for Corpus Christi, which has grown and grown over the years, and it's now very successful, attracting thousands of people. What first inspired you to initiate that, and did you ever imagine it would become so successful?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. I remember one Sunday morning I was walking around with Cardinal Pell, celebrating the Mass with him at the cathedral. And as we were walking around, the council had just fairly recently redeveloped what's now sort of piazza, if you like, in front of the cathedral. It used to be a bowling club, but they'd redeveloped it and put in a swimming pool underneath and so on. And I just said to the Cardinal as we were about to go into the cathedral, wouldn't it be wonderful if this was full of people? And I at that time, Pope John Paul II had declared a year of the Eucharist. And so I had in mind the idea that we would have a procession from, which was the first really church in Sydney, down the Marist Church, and walk from there up to St Mary's Cathedral on the Feast of Corpus Christi. So I proposed that to the Cardinal, and he was happy to for me to proceed with it. And it has grown and grown over the years. And I was very conscious that we did need to have public expressions of faith, and particularly Corpus Christi processions, which are very much been part of the tradition of the church really since about the 12th and 13th centuries, to have this public profession of our faith in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. So that was an initiative that's continued to grow and develop, and it's been wonderful to see how it's really blossomed and flourished in Sydney.
Now, you mentioned earlier World Youth Day in 2008. You were there for that great event as well. Tell me your memories of that.
That was an extraordinary, I think it was an extraordinary event. Having in Australia, so far away from some of the other centres of where you get the numbers of people, but the Cardinal was really committed to having it. And I saw it as I think it was a real watershed moment for the Church in Australia, because I think it introduced into the Australian Church a number of things that were lacking at that time. Particularly, it showed that the profession of Catholic faith was something that was attractive, particularly for young people, and say the catechesis sessions with bishops leading up to the final Mass, and then all the public expressions of faith. We had adoration tents placed all around the city, and people were just coming and praying in these adoration tents. We had many of the other activities for young people, which were both contemporary and engaging and interesting, and yet profoundly Catholic. All of that, I think, was a revelation for many. They couldn't believe that this was possible in our time. So the Cardinal's vision was extraordinary, that, and his confidence that we could do it. And I think the effect of it was very profound upon the Church, not only in Sydney, but I think across the nation.
Yes. And what about the witness of all those young people to the other people in the city who would have seen?
Well, that's right. People were amazed to see young people from all over the world, joyful, peaceful, and the whole city was transformed. And I think the other thing too that was very important was, I think a lot of young Catholics in Australia saw many young religious, dressed as religious too, very clearly religious, who had come, from different parts of the world. I think that was also important because it did show that religious life, which at that stage was in a bit of a decline in Australia, they saw that there were expressions of religious life which were young and dynamic and fresh, So I think that was a great testament to religious life as being a possibility for young people.
Mm-hmm. Now, in 2013, you received another phone call from the nuncio to tell you you had been appointed Archbishop of Hobart. What did you think when you first heard that news?
Yeah, well, that came at a very unusual time. I was packing to go to the World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro, and I was taking a group of, I think, about 30 or 40 young people from Sydney up to a place called Fortaleza, which is right up in the north of Brazil. There was it was a particular pilgrimage that I'd been organising because there was a lay community up there that I was very impressed with, Shalom community, very impressive community. So I thought it'd be good for young people to see this community in Fortaleza. And so I was busy packing and organising to go to the World Youth Day, and I received a phone call from the nuncio's office saying that the nuncio wanted to see me, and I explained, well, I'm packing to go. This is a Friday. I was packing to go, I think, on the Sunday or to head off, and so the nuncio said, well, can you come down straight away? So I had a few things on, I cancelled those, so I hopped in the car in Sydney and drove down to Canberra and met the nuncio there, and he came in holding a fax to say, said that he received this fax last night. Pope Francis has appointed me as Archbishop of Hobart, and so I said, because normally you have a few days to reflect and then provide your response. But I said to him, I'm about to go across to Brazil. And so he said, well, maybe you better write it now. So he just gave me a piece of paper. So I wrote my letter to the Holy Father saying I'll accept the role as Archbishop of Hobart.
Right. And what was your knowledge about Tasmania at that point?
Well, my main knowledge of Tasmania was the fact that I had been down here a number of times on bushwalks. I'd done the Cradle Mountain Walk on a number of occasions and done other bushwalks. I'd actually also cycled around Tasmania as a young priest. So I knew Tasmania more as a holiday destination, if you like. I didn't know much about the church in Tasmania. So it was a surprise to be appointed down here to Tasmania.
Yes. So you were installed as Archbishop on the 17th of September 2013. What was your main focus coming into the role?
Coming down here, I obviously I was reflecting and praying. I did have a sense as I was coming down here of a certain. One says I felt myself coming down more like a missionary bishop, but just a sense of mission was very high on my agenda. As you know, I have always felt very strongly the call to evangelise, and so that was I think very much in my mind coming down here in that sense of exercising a role of evangelisation in Tasmania.
Mm-hmm. Were you aware at that point of some of the challenges surrounding the Catholic faith in Tasmania in terms of Catholics being a very small percentage of the population, low mass attendance rate amongst Catholics and things like that?
Yeah, I don't think I was as aware of that when I first came down, but I became conscious of the fact that we, in Tasmania, and I find it hard to understand why, but the percentage of Catholics in the general population in Tasmania is a lot smaller than many other places, certainly smaller than Sydney. Mm-hmm. And similarly, the participation in the life of the church among Catholics was lower, significantly lower than, again, a place like Sydney that I knew. So I became aware of that, I think, subsequently after I came down to Ripon and had a look at things. One thing I was aware of fairly immediately was the fact that there was a shortage of priests here, and when I came, I was conscious of the fact that one particular priest was retiring, and there was really nobody to replace him in the parish, and I was aware that a number of other parishes didn't have a resident priest, and priests were just coming in once a month to celebrate Mass. So I was very, very conscious when I came here of the need to provide priests for the parishes.
Mm-hmm. And how did you set about trying to build up the priesthood here in Tasmania?
Initially, there were, just through a couple of circumstances, there were a couple of priests that I knew who I thought may be interested in coming down to Tasmania. And so I spoke to them. And then even in those early days, I didn't have any particular plan for involving priests. I realised that I couldn't get priests from even religious orders in Tasmania, in Australia. I couldn't obviously try to poach priests from other dioceses because they were all needed. So I realised that I did need to look overseas, for priests from overseas to come. Just normally through different circumstances, somebody would express interest in coming and so forth. And so I would talk to them and then start the process of bringing them into the Archdiocese.
Now, the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse was going on from 2013 to 2017, and I believe you did play a role in that process. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that was all sort of really breaking open. I mean, the whole sexual abuse crisis had been identified earlier on and had been building, if you like, but then we had the Royal Commission, which began more or less at the same time that I became Archbishop. The whole sexual abuse crisis, was a great time of shame and difficulty for the Church. As I became aware of, firstly, revelations of child sex abuse, it was firstly a shock to me. I had no idea. I think it was only actually when I became Archbishop and met with some of the victim survivors of child sex abuse that I became very conscious of how terrible it was, the enormous damage that was being done to people. And it was really through meeting them and hearing their stories and realising the impact on their life. I realised how terrible it was. I was asked at one stage, I had asked all the archbishops actually one time to come to Royal Commission. That was a very difficult time to be in the questioned in the Royal Commission. But for me, I think I became very, very conscious of how serious it was and the enormous damage that was being done to people. And so I was very determined myself to do all I can for victims and survivors, and also I realised that we as a church needed to see the absolute seriousness of it and seek to deal with it and eradicate it in the church.
Now, in 2015, you distributed a booklet called Don't Mess with Marriage, which was written by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, and you distributed that to parishes and schools around Tasmania. And subsequently, a complaint was lodged against you to the Anti-Discrimination Commission. Just tell me, what was that experience like, and did you ever expect something like that to happen?
Yes, as the debate around changing the definition of marriage to allow same-sex couples to be married, I was aware that we did need as a bishop to help explain to people why the church believed that marriage should be between a man and a woman. And this document had been prepared by the Bishops' Conference. So I saw it simply that my role as a bishop was to teach and explain Catholic teaching. And I thought this booklet was very balanced and clear in its presentation. So I decided to distribute it in the parishes, but I also was aware that it would be useful if we could get it out to families who maybe not practicing the faith, but who who send their children to Catholic schools. So send out copies also to schools and ask schools to distribute it. And I saw it mainly as a way of helping people in the midst of this debate to understand what the Church understood about the nature of marriage. But it did elicit some strong reactions, and including a complaint which was lodged against me. So then I was requested to engage in a process with the Anti-Discrimination Commission here in Tasmania.
Mm-hmm. And what impact did that have on you going through something like that?
Look, I did find it difficult, obviously. I tried, I didn't want to, set myself up against the complainant. I was trying to I proposed we have a more conciliatory process, and we had a number of meetings between the complainant and myself, and I was just trying to say, look, I'm just, as a bishop, trying to present to the Catholic people, I'm not attacking anybody, and not, it's not a direct act of unjust discrimination against this particular person or anybody else, but just explaining the position. That went on for some time, so I had a number of meetings in the offices of the Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, but eventually the complainant decided to drop the case, and so which was a bit awkward because I didn't know how it would eventually resolve itself, and I was wondering, well, the next day somebody else could do exactly the same thing. I might have to go through the whole process again, because this is quite draining and takes a lot of time and effort to be involved in this process.
And what's the impact when it comes to well next time that you might want to speak about something or distribute something? Like what kind of effect did that have?
Yes, look, it's difficult. I believe that a bishop has a role of teaching the Catholic faith. I think it's a solemn duty that's given to a bishop in particular. And therefore I feel that's something I just need to do, and I've tried to continue to do it. Not to try to be inflammatory or try to upset people, but try to be faithful, and particularly I think to serve the Catholic people by saying, as a bishop, look, this is what the Catholic Church teaches on this matter, and try to explain it to people. So I feel I've got a responsibility to teach the Catholic faith in its entirety, in its richness, and so that continues to remain something which I believe is very much integral to my role as a bishop.
Now, another challenging time for the Church in Australia was the conviction and jailing of Cardinal George Pell, who you knew quite well. Just tell me, what was that like for you during that time?
Yes, I found that a very, very difficult time. Very, very difficult, because I knew him very closely because of those 10 years of working with him. I knew he was innocent. I had no doubt whatsoever that this was a complete travesty of justice, really, that this could happen. I must admit, I found myself quite stunned by it and distressed by it. In one sense, it was worsened when the appeal that was lodged failed as well. I did find that a very, very difficult, a very low time for myself and for the Church, because I think the Church was going through this whole cathartic process of dealing with revelations of child sex abuse, and also being acutely aware of the failure of the Church to adequately deal with it, even though we had begun processes back in the 1990s to deal with it. We hadn't really done it thoroughly enough. We hadn't done it with strong enough conviction. And now to add to this, the fact of Cardinal Pell being jailed was, yes, for me was a very a very difficult time.
Mm-hmm. And were you able to communicate with him during that time and offer your support to him?
I didn't visit. Visitation for him was limited. I was aware that, and I kept in contact with people who had visited him and talked to them about how he was, and kept tabs of how things were progressing for him. Felt very, very deeply for him during what must have been an extraordinarily harrowing time for him personally.
Yes. Now, earlier this year, Your Grace, you wrote a pastoral letter called We Are Salt to the Earth, which did receive some backlash from certain quarters. Now, this was focused on religious freedom, which is something that you've been talking about a lot in recent times. Why did you decide to write that pastoral letter?
I wrote it because I'd become quite involved in the whole area of religious freedom, because at that stage the government was quite seriously considering removing protections that are in federal law for religious institutions, and particularly schools would have been the immediate area of concern. At the time, it seems that the government were still moving in that direction, or likely to do it. I felt there was a need to speak publicly about it. I had been involved with meetings and various things associated with trying to make representations to the government about it. I wasn't confident at that stage that the government would not proceed with it. And I felt again that I needed to alert the Catholic people to what was going on, and to also just to say that we do need to be able to preserve the integrity of our schools, and our Catholic schools need to be able to be grounded in Catholic teaching. And so I decided to write a letter just alerting people to the potential of this legislation not enabling Catholic schools to continue to exercise their mission.
Yes, and this goes back to what you mentioned earlier about the role of a bishop, which we're needing to be able to speak out in defence of the faith and so forth, does it not?
Yes, one of the things that was interesting, I did receive a lot of emails critical of the stance that I'd taken, but I got more emails from people thanking me for speaking out. Because I was very conscious of the fact that while we, as the Church, have been engaged in discussions with government and making representations to government and working with other churches in speaking with government, we've been doing all of that, if you like, behind the scenes. But I was aware that people could feel that the Church was not really taking a clear stand on this, and I felt that there was a need to express clearly our concern as a bishop. I wrote the pastoral letter as the Archbishop of Hobart, so it was my direct concern about preserving the integrity of our Catholic schools here in Tasmania.
Yes. Now, as Archbishop of Hobart, I know you're focused very strongly on seeking to build up the faith amongst Catholics here. Tell me about the various initiatives that you've put forward over the years to help do that.
Yes, as I said before, I was aware, I discovered coming here that we really need to do things to animate the faith of Catholics. I think firstly we needed to see what we could do to help the Catholics who are active in the life of the Church to grow stronger in faith. So, for instance, I began a Eucharistic procession here on Corpus Christi, as I'd done in Sydney. When we had the 100th anniversary of the apparitions of Our Lady at Fatima, so in 2017, I took the opportunity to have a consecration of Tasmania to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So paralleling what the messages that Mary had given back 100 years ago, and invoking Mary's intercession for Tasmania. Similarly, a couple of years later, we had the year of St. Joseph, which was called by the Holy Father, and I became aware of the idea of invoking the patronage of St. Joseph over the church. So at the end of that year, we had a dedication of the Church of Tasmania under the patronage of St. Joseph. I think those spiritual things are very important. It is a spiritual battle that we're engaged in, and so calling down the grace of God, calling down, seeking the intercession of Blessed Virgin Mary, seeking the patronage of St. Joseph, for me were important things to do to help strengthen the faith of the church here in Tasmania. But also I was doing a lot of other practical things for a number of years. A couple of years I used to go to parishes and put on a one-night mission in the parish. It was just a simple, we had some music, some testimony, I'd preach, we'd have the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and confessions would be available, and then I'd be available to pray with people. I was just trying to nurture people's personal faith, draw them closer to Christ, draw them into a stronger life of faith. So I was always looking for ways, keen to promote Divine Mercy Sundays, and I was always very committed to that each year. So just trying to find ways that I could help the Catholic people, firstly, be strengthened and deepened in their faith. And certainly I was very keen to encourage adoration of the Blessed Sacrament in churches, and also Marian devotion in various ways, rosary and so on. I think these things are very important. Just the Catholics live a spiritual life, a strong spiritual life. So I was just trying to find ways to encourage that. Certainly, I was very keen that the liturgy that was celebrated, say in the cathedral here, was something which was spiritually enriching for people. So I'd put a focus. I was very interested in the quality of the 10:30 Mass that I would normally celebrate in the cathedral. I did have a chance later on of doing some renovations in the cathedral, which are actually still continuing, still doing some more things to help the cathedral being a place where one senses it is a sacred place. And people's sense of reverence and prayer are enriched by their coming to the church. So trying to find ways that we just could nourish and nurture the spiritual life of Catholics was probably an initial key focus, and remains a key focus. But also I'm also interested in how we can become more missionary oriented, how we can be reaching out to people. The first Christmas I came here, I heard on the radio they were saying that this Christmas has decided that no Christian carols were to be played in shops and publicly, and all the banners and things were not to be specifically Christian. They were, just to be Christmas kind of thing. So I remember going along to the mayor and saying to him, would it be all right if we, just for celebration of Christmas, brought a crib down into Elizabeth Street Mall and we just sang some carols? And he didn't have any problem with that. So I've felt, as the society was tending to take Christ out of Christmas, I would try to bring the real message of Christmas back. So we've done that every year since, and I've also begun carols on the hill we have each year, again strongly expressing the Christian understanding of Christmas. Each Christmas and each Easter I normally do a message which I put out on radio, because I wanted to communicate to all of Tasmanians, reminding them of the meaning of Christmas or the meaning of Easter. So I'm trying to find ways that we as a Catholic Church can be present to the society, be able to present our faith. We might touch and reach out to people and try to draw them back to the faith. I think this is our challenge as a church. How can we help people rediscover faith and want to come back into a living relationship with Christ?
Mm-hmm. Now, you submitted your resignation this year on the 5th of June on your 75th birthday as required under canon law. And now, of course, we're waiting just to see what's going to happen next and who your replacement might be and so forth. What thoughts are on your mind now as you move towards retirement?
Yes, it's a very unusual time because I knew 75 was coming up. I don't feel like moving into retirement. I still feel a sense of wanting to continue to serve, and I still believe I have energy and desire to continue to serve the Church and its mission here in Tasmania. So moving to retirement is a little bit of a challenge for me. I'm still continuing. My resignation has been accepted, but I've been asked to wait until I'm replaced. So I'll still continue to be active, and I have a number of initiatives and things that I'm doing, which I'll keep going. Moving into retirement, in one sense, I feel a little bit like Simeon. It's an unusual thing, but Simeon had been waiting for the coming of the Messiah, and then when he encountered the Christ child in the temple, he just said, "Now, Lord, let your servant go in peace." In one sense, I feel once I've been asked by the Church just to step aside when the new bishop comes, yes. I feel, well, I have carried out my mission that has been entrusted to me by the Church as a priest and now as a bishop. And I move into retirement, but I'm hoping I can still be present. I'll live here in Tasmania and continue to serve where I can. I do know that I'm now to step back. Yeah. A new bishop is take over, but I want to be here. And if anything, I want to keep praying for the Church here in Tasmania, interceding for God to come with His grace upon Tasmania, upon the Church in Tasmania, that it might be the Church that is really faithful to Christ and is able to continue Christ's mission here in Tasmania.
And how would you summarise the 50 years of priesthood that you've experienced?
There's a phrase from the letter to the Ephesians, which I think sort of summarises my life and my priesthood and my role as bishop. And that where it just simply says, "It is by grace you are saved through faith." I'm just very conscious of grace. I'm very aware that I need salvation, and I want to place myself under the mercy of God, under the grace of God. Living a life of faith is the means by which I can invoke God's grace in my life. And so I feel that sort of summarises how I've tried to live my life. Living a life of faith that has meant the grace of God has been present and active in my life.
And has your understanding of the priesthood changed over that 50 years?
I certainly think it's been enriched. Yeah. I think now, after 50 years a priest, I think the thing for me more than anything else is the priest is one who stands in the presence of God for the people and really with the people and for the people, and invokes God's grace and mercy upon the community of believers, but more broadly upon the world. So in a way, for me, the most important moment for me is standing at the altar as a priest. And I think more than anything else, that's what I feel, that it's what God can do in and through the priesthood, in and through the church, that is the most important thing. And we have to be just available, be servants of what God wants to do.
And looking back over 50 years of priesthood, what are you most grateful for?
I'm just grateful for the call. I'm very content to have served as a priest, and grateful to God for his presence and guidance and somehow getting me there.
Well, thank you very much, Your Grace, for your time today. It's been a real honour and a privilege to hear about your reflections from 50 years of priesthood. And I just want to say congratulations once again on your Golden Jubilee.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Catherine.